Retired Master Sergeant Raymond Ray Holloway sits quietly in the corner booth of Murphy's Diner, reading his newspaper over black coffee, when the leather-clad biker towers over him and snarls, "Move it, old man, this is my table," before delivering a sharp slap across Ray's weathered cheek that echoes through the suddenly silent restaurant. Raymond Holloway had celebrated his 68th birthday 3 weeks ago, but he still carried himself with the straight back and steady gait of a career soldier. Every Tuesday morning for the past 5 years, he'd claimed the same corner booth at Murphy's Diner on Elm Street, the one with the clear view of the parking lot and the exit. Old habits from 30 years in the Army never really died. The diner was a local institution, family-owned for 3 generations. Ray knew every waitress by name and always left a generous tip. The walls were covered with faded photographs of the town's history, including several pictures from various wars featuring local boys who'd served overseas. Ray's own photo from his deployment to Afghanistan hung near the coffee station, though most people didn't make the connection between the young sergeant in desert camouflage and the quiet older man who read his paper in the corner. His silver hair was always neatly combed, and he wore simple clothes that never drew attention. A faded American flag pin sat on the lapel of his jacket, so small that most people never noticed it. If you're enjoying these powerful veteran stories, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss these incredible tales of courage and honor. Ray had enlisted right out of high school in 1973, 3 months after his 18th birthday. He'd served in places most people couldn't pronounce, from Germany during the Cold War to the deserts of Iraq and Afghanistan. 30 years of service had taken him from a scared kid from Ohio to a master sergeant responsible for training young soldiers who reminded him of his own son. His boy Michael had followed in his footsteps, graduating from West Point and serving as an Army captain. Ray was prouder of Michael than any medal or commendation he'd ever received. The kid had grown up hearing bedtime stories about honor and duty instead of fairy tales, and he'd turned into the kind of officer Ray would have been honored to serve under. But the wars had changed both father and son. Ray came home from his final deployment with a Purple Heart and a slight limp from shrapnel that would ache on rainy days. Michael came home from his tours carrying invisible wounds that were harder to heal. The nightmares, the jumpiness, the way he'd scan every room for exits the moment he walked in. 3 years ago, Michael had moved back to their hometown to be closer to his father. He'd taken a job at the regional Army recruiting station, helping other young people find their path to service. Ray was grateful for the company and proud of how his son had found a way to keep serving even after his combat days were over. The trouble started when Jake "Thunder" Morrison roared into Murphy's parking lot on his Harley-Davidson at exactly 9:47 a.m., the same time Ray was settling into his usual Tuesday morning routine. Thunder was the president of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, a group that had been causing problems around town for the better part of 6 months. The Iron Wolves weren't your typical weekend riders. They dealt in intimidation and small-time crime, using their leather jackets and loud bikes to claim territory wherever they went. Thunder stood 6 foot 4 inches tall and weighed nearly 300 pounds, with arms covered in tattoos that told stories of bar fights and prison time. He'd been coming to Murphy's for 3 weeks now, each time demanding the corner booth where Ray always sat. The first week, Ray had quietly moved to another table without complaint. The second week, he'd done the same thing. But this morning was different. This morning, Ray had decided he was tired of running. When Thunder approached the booth with his usual swagger, Ray looked up from his newspaper but didn't move. He politely explained that he'd been sitting in this same spot every Tuesday for 5 years, and he'd appreciate it if Thunder could find another table. Thunder's face turned red with anger. He wasn't used to being told no, especially not by some old man in a diner. His voice rose loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear as he called Ray names that made the waitresses look away in embarrassment. The other customers stopped eating and stared. A young mother quickly ushered her children toward the exit. The owner, Mrs. Murphy, looked terrified but afraid to intervene. Thunder had made it clear in previous visits that he didn't appreciate interference from management. When Ray calmly refused to move again, Thunder's anger exploded into action. The slap came fast and hard, catching Ray across his left cheek with enough force to knock his reading glasses to the floor. The sound echoed through the diner like a gunshot, followed by absolute silence. Ray's cheek burned from the impact, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation that followed. He could feel every eye in the diner watching him, waiting to see how the old man would respond to being publicly shamed. For a moment, Ray was transported back to his childhood, remembering his father's words about standing up to bullies. Then he thought about his military training, about all the young soldiers he'd mentored over the years, about the values he'd tried to instill in his own son. He thought about the flag pin on his jacket and what it represented. But mostly, he thought about Michael and how disappointed his son would be if he learned that his father had been humiliated in public and done nothing about it. Ray had taught Michael to fight for what was right, to protect the innocent, to never back down from a bully. How could he face his son knowing he'd failed to live up to his own teachings? Ray slowly reached down and picked up his glasses, checking them for damage before putting them back on. His hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He looked up at Thunder with calm, measured eyes that had seen combat in 3 different wars. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any threat or angry response could have. Ray simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his cell phone, and made a call. Thunder laughed when he saw Ray reach for his phone. He assumed the old man was calling the police, and that didn't worry him. The Iron Wolves had dealt with small-town cops before. A few threats, maybe some property damage, and most local law enforcement learned to look the other way. What Thunder didn't know was that Ray wasn't calling the police. He was calling his son. The conversation was brief and quiet. Ray simply said he was at Murphy's diner and that he needed Michael to come by when he had a chance. He didn't mention the slap or the confrontation. He didn't need to. Michael could hear something in his father's voice that told him this wasn't a casual request. After Ray hung up, Thunder made himself comfortable in the booth, spreading his leather jacket across the seat and ordering the most expensive item on the menu. He made crude comments to the waitresses and spoke loudly about how some people needed to learn respect for their betters. Ray moved to a small table near the window where he could watch the parking lot. He ordered another cup of coffee and waited. His cheek still stung, and he could see the concerned looks from other customers, but he remained calm and patient. Thunder's confidence grew with each passing minute. He told his story to anyone who would listen, embellishing the details about how he'd taught some old fool a lesson about respect. He bragged about his motorcycle club and made veiled threats about what happened to people who didn't show proper appreciation for the Iron Wolves. The diner's atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Several customers paid their bills quickly and left. Mrs. Murphy hovered nervously near the kitchen, unsure whether to call the police herself. The remaining patrons ate in silence, afraid to draw Thunder's attention. Ray checked his watch. Michael would be here soon. He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan as an infantry officer and now worked as a recruiter. More importantly, he'd inherited his father's sense of justice and his unwillingness to let bullies win. But Ray had one more surprise that even Michael didn't know about yet. 11 minutes after Ray made his phone call, a convoy of military vehicles pulled into Murphy's parking lot. Not just Michael's personal truck, but 3 official army vehicles filled with soldiers in full-dress uniform. Michael Holloway stepped out of the lead vehicle, now wearing the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel. The promotion had come through just last week, but he hadn't had a chance to tell his father yet. He'd been planning to surprise Ray with the news over lunch. Behind Michael came 12 soldiers from the regional recruiting station, all of them veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, all of them personally recruited and trained by Lieutenant Colonel Holloway. They'd been in the middle of a formal ceremony when Michael got his father's call, and they'd insisted on coming along when they heard the careful tone in his voice. The soldiers formed up in the parking lot with military precision, their dress uniforms and polished boots creating an impressive display. Michael walked point, his expression serious but controlled as he approached the diner entrance. Thunder looked up from his meal as the restaurant filled with soldiers. His cocky expression faltered as he realized he was suddenly outnumbered by 12 to 1. These weren't local cops or weekend warriors. These were active-duty army personnel, and they moved with the confidence of people who'd seen real combat. Michael approached his father's table first, noting the red mark on Ray's cheek. He asked quietly if his father was all right, and Ray nodded toward Thunder's booth. Michael's eyes followed his father's gaze, and his jaw tightened when he saw the biker still sprawled arrogantly across the seat. Lieutenant Colonel Holloway turned to face Thunder with the bearing of an officer accustomed to command. He didn't raise his voice or make threats. He simply introduced himself and asked Thunder to step outside for a conversation. Thunder realized that his intimidation tactics weren't going to work against trained soldiers. These men had faced real enemies in real wars, not bar fights and parking lot confrontations. The conversation in the parking lot lasted exactly 7 minutes. Thunder emerged looking pale and shaken, his earlier bravado completely gone. He approached Ray's table with his head down and offered a stammering apology for his behavior. Ray accepted the apology with quiet dignity, but he made it clear that Thunder needed to understand something important. Ray explained that he'd served his country for 30 years, that he'd earned the right to drink his coffee in peace, and that respect wasn't something you demanded, it was something you earned. He promised that neither he nor any of the Iron Wolves would bother Ray or anyone else at Murphy's Diner again. He left a $20 bill on the table to pay for Ray's coffee and quickly headed for the exit. Michael waited until Thunder's motorcycle disappeared down the street before joining his father at the small table near the window. Ray looked at his son's new rank insignia and smiled with obvious pride. They talked quietly about the promotion, about family, and about the importance of standing up for what's right. The other soldiers remained respectfully distant, giving father and son their privacy while ensuring that everyone in the diner understood that Master Sergeant Raymond Holloway was under their protection. Mrs. Murphy refused to let either Ray or Michael pay for their meal. She said it was the least she could do for someone who'd served his country with such honor. Several other customers approached Ray's table to shake his hand and thank him for his service. Word of the incident spread quickly through the small town, but not in the way Thunder had expected. 2 weeks later, Ray received a letter from the mayor declaring him an honorary citizen of the year. The local newspaper ran a story about the incident, focusing not on the confrontation but on the respect that the community owed to its veterans. The Iron Wolves left town permanently, finding a new territory where they hoped to avoid any more encounters with military families. Thunder sent Ray a handwritten letter of apology, explaining that he'd learned something important about real strength and dignity. Michael started joining his father for coffee at Murphy's every Tuesday morning, a tradition that brought them closer together and gave them time to share stories about their military experiences. The corner booth became known around town as the Veterans Table, and other former service members began stopping by to pay their respects. Ray's reading glasses, which had been knocked to the floor during the confrontation, were replaced by a local optometrist who refused payment. The new frames were stronger than the old ones, and Ray joked that maybe sometimes you had to lose something before you could see clearly again. The incident reminded everyone in town that heroism doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It lives on in the quiet dignity of people who continue to serve their communities long after their military careers are over. Real strength isn't about intimidation or violence. It's about standing up for what's right, even when you're outnumbered, even when you're afraid, even when no one expects you to fight back. Sometimes the most powerful weapon a veteran possesses isn't a gun or a fist. It's the respect they've earned through a lifetime of service and sacrifice.